Operation the Velvet Curtain. During the Sino-American War, China had a submarine quietly running surveillance patrols along the east coast of the United States. It was called the SSN-371A, and to keep it safe, the Chinese created Operation Velvet Curtain. The operation had 3 layers to it. First, a spy named Wang Yang was already embedded on American soil, operating under multiple aliases, and acting as the ground contact support for the submarine's mission. Second, if the submarine ever got captured, an operative named Zhang would be sent in disguised as a defector to destroy it before the Americans could study it, as detailed in this holotape. And third, if Zhang pulled that off, a hidden bunker beneath the grounds of Calvert Mansion was already waiting so he could be terminated and avoid potential questioning. Unfortunately, none of that held, because instead, the Americans caught the submarine first and captured the crew before they could scuttle it, putting the entire operation into crisis before Zhang could even be deployed. And then, of course, the Great War happened, which ultimately terminated Zhang and made the whole thing pretty much pointless. Wang Yang was eventually tracked down by local informants, transferred to Turtle Dove detention camp, and just expired there during questioning, never giving up the submarine's self-destruct codes, which were hidden in a dental capsule the Americans never found. 200 years later, the lone wanderer is the one who finishes it, recovering the codes and finally destroying the submarine the way China had always intended. The extraction bunker under Calvert Mansion is still there and activates when you go through the mission. Operation Trinitite. China needed a base of operations deep inside American territory, and their solution was to bury it underneath a working food processing plant in Morgantown, Appalachia. The facility was called the Fujinia Intelligence Base, and it had one primary goal: to figure out if America's nuclear silos in Appalachia were real and operational, and if they were, destroy them. To support that, they were also running 2 research programs inside the base, one developing advanced stealth tech for field agents, and another for building an improved Liberator, a small Chinese attack robot they were hoping to eventually deploy as a frontline force in an invasion of the American mainland. Unfortunately, the silo mission fell apart almost immediately because they turned out to be guarded by a mechanized army the facility had no way of matching, which pushed all the attention onto the 2 research programs running inside the base. But the stealth program wasn't doing much better. Every resource was being funneled to the Anchorage front instead, leaving the team starved of the parts and reinforcements they needed to make any real progress. The Liberator program was the only thing keeping the operation from being a complete dead end, with the team making genuine improvements on the previous model and getting close to pitching it to command. Then the bombs fell, and none of it mattered. The station chief ordered everyone to blend into the local population and wait for the party leadership to make contact. But they never did, and eventually the Trinitite was finished off for good by the Enclave, who tracked down the facility in 2079, killed the holdouts who refused to surrender, and walked out with everything worth taking. The Yangtze 31 Ballistic Mission. The Yangtze 31 was a Chinese nuclear submarine commanded by Captain Zhao, and in the final days of the Sino-American War, it was sitting in American waters, loaded with nuclear warheads and ready to fire when the order came down. When the bombs fell, that order came. Zhao launched the submarine's missiles at their targets, successfully firing all but one of them before the exchange was over, which from a military standpoint was the mission completed. But shortly after firing, the vessel struck a mine that tore into its reactor, and with the submarine taking on serious damage, Zhao had no choice but to take shelter in the nearest available harbor before the reactor gave out entirely. However, the submarine never moved again, and neither did most of the crew. The radiation from the damaged reactor killed or ghoulified nearly all 24 men over the weeks that followed, leaving Zhao as the only one who kept his sanity, trapped in a crippled submarine surrounded by what remained of his crew. 200 years later, he's still there. Players find the Yangtze through a local boy named Donnie Kowalski, who had been watching the submarine's periscope break the surface of Boston Harbor and convinced himself he'd spotted a sea monster. When the sole survivor boards the vessel, Zhao's one remaining request is to get the submarine moving again, which means finding a replacement dampening coil and getting the reactor back online. Once that's done, Zhao heads back out to sea. The DC Infiltration Hub. The technique of hiding something in plain sight is one of the oldest tricks in espionage, and the Chinese pulled it off almost perfectly in Washington, D.C. Mama Dolce's food processing plant looked exactly like what it was supposed to look like, a legitimate pre-war factory, unremarkable and easy to ignore. But underneath that cover, it was actually the central hub for Chinese intelligence operations across the entire D.C. area, coordinating a network of spies already implanted in the region. The orders found on the terminal inside make the scope of it clear. Agents were to rendezvous with existing operatives, establish cover identities within the factory, and report back to command once the first stage was complete. It was a proper infrastructure, not just a single outpost. What's particularly striking is how long it survived undiscovered. The factory kept running, the cover held, and the agents inside maintained their positions right up until the bombs fell, and there was nobody left to report back to. Players find Mama Dolce's in Fallout 3 occupied now by the ghoulified soldiers and operatives who were isolated there over 2 centuries. Project Zhu-Rong. Not every Chinese operation in the Fallout universe was about espionage or military strategy. Some of them were simply about getting a better weapon built. To do that without raising suspicion, China commissioned a company called LOB Enterprises in Falls Church to develop a new incendiary sidearm for their military. This meant that it could fire conventional ammo, but deliver fire upon impact. Meanwhile, they secretly funneled all of the research back to China through a front company called Happy Liberty Imports. Getting to a final working prototype wasn't easy. The project went through several failed versions that were either too heavy to use, had ammunition so fragile it detonated from the vibration of walking, or burned the shooter's hands badly enough in rapid fire to be unusable. However, the final version, Zhu-Rong V418, solved all of that. But the overseas money transfer had long caught the attention of federal investigators, and by the time the V418 was finished, agents were already raiding the building. On the exact same day, the Great War began, which meant the weapon never made it to China. Players can find the only known surviving V418 in Fallout 3, locked in the CEO's briefcase inside LOB Enterprises, completed just in time for the world to end before it could be used. Little Yangtze, the human farm. During the Sino-American War, the US government rounded up Chinese and Chinese-American citizens under the suspicion of being communist spies. Those who were sent to Little Yangtze, deep within the Big MT research crater, faced a fate far worse than simple detention. The scientists there viewed the prisoners not as detainees, but as expendable test subjects for their latest experiments. This included the extraction of brain, feeding the insatiable demands of the ongoing RoboBrain program. Escape attempts were constant, which eventually pushed the camp commandant to fit every single prisoner with a prototype explosive collar that would detonate the moment anyone crossed the perimeter. When the bombs fell, the military abandoned Big MT and left the prisoners behind, still caged and collared, while the fallout ghoulified the survivors over the following years. Players find the camp in Old World Blues exactly as it was left, 2 centuries later, with some prisoners so far gone from captivity that they rush the gates the moment they spot movement and blow themselves up in the process. The collars ended up mattering beyond the camp. The rogue Brotherhood elder Elijah later used the surviving prisoners to reverse engineer the technology, eventually producing the explosive collars he deployed in the Sierra Madre. The Shih-huang-ti. The Shih-huang-ti was a Chinese submarine that ran aground in San Francisco shortly after the Great War began, stranding its crew in the burning, irradiated ruins of a city that had just been bombed into rubble. With no way home and no mission left to complete, the crew made a decision. They weren't going to die there. Using what they could salvage from the submarine itself, they established a foothold in what used to be San Francisco's Chinatown, and over the years that followed, they stripped the vessel down piece by piece, repurposing its metal and systems to build what eventually became a functioning settlement called the Steel Palace. Even the submarine's mainframe computer was moved to the mainland and reinstalled there, becoming what the Shi, the survivors and their descendants came to call themselves, reverently referred to as the Emperor. By the time players encounter the Shi in Fallout 2, they've grown into one of the most technologically advanced factions in post-war California, preserving their language, their culture, and a level of scientific knowledge most of the wasteland can only guess at. The military mission was a failure. They never returned home and the submarine never sailed again, but what the crew built from its wreckage is one of the few genuinely successful stories in a universe that doesn't have many of them. Operation Piercing Viper. 200 years after the Great War, there were still Chinese operatives in Appalachia waiting for orders that were never coming, and a few of them had found something worth staying for. Deep beneath the hills west of the White Spring Resort, ghoulified survivors connected to the Fujinia intelligence base had established a new facility called the Motherlode Acquisition Facility, and they had managed to do something remarkable. Capture a semi-sentient Hornwright industrial drilling machine called the Motherlode, and use it to dig a tunnel network spreading across Appalachia. By 2103, 4 active tunnels were running, through the mountains to the north, through the central and southern Savage Divide, and into the mire, with a 5th tunnel still being dug toward a location so sensitive, it's listed as fully redacted in the facility's own terminals. The operation also involved an agent named Moshu, a former Crimson Dragoon who had defected years earlier to start a family, only to be tracked down by a loyalist who found her through a tracer hidden in her stealth suit. Players find the facility in Fallout 76 during the Wastelanders update to later obtain a Chinese stealth armor. Once they're inside, they'll see a terminal entry that detailed a full data wipe because of American presence, triggering Operation Piercing Viper. What Piercing Viper was ultimately aiming at has never been fully confirmed, but people speculate that it was being aimed at White Spring Bunker, an enclave base hidden beneath the White Spring Resort. This would make the operation actually a preparation to strike the last remnants of the American government. And that's every secret Chinese operation in Fallout explained, because even after the bombs fell, some wars never ended, they just went underground.